Thank you very much, Claire, and welcome everybody to today's event, which is, of course, the Pearson Edexcel International A-Level Economics, and it's getting ready to teach or welcome Module 2. So I know some of you will have been with us for Module 1, but certainly not everybody. So there will be a few slides where there's a bit of a recap, just to go through some of the key things from the first module as well. And there is a lot of information to get through in today's event over the next 2 hours. So as Claire has said, you can put in any questions into the chat box. However, I envisage covering most of the typical questions I expect to see as we go through the event. So I'm not ignoring you, but I probably won't be referring to your questions until the very end, where hopefully there will be time to address anything that hasn't already been covered. But as I say, mostly anything that you are asking will be in the slides to come. So ideally, if you can just hang back, and if there isn't, if things aren't covered during the next 2 hours, then ask at the end. Hopefully there'll be some time then if we can crack on with it. Okay, so as I say, welcome to Pearson Edexcel International A-Level Economics. And just to sort of give you a bit of a background and to tell you what's happening in this session today, the agenda, as you can see here on the screen, we're going to be looking at assessment objectives for the qualification and an understanding of the question types. That's the command words, the taxonomy that's used for the qualification, as well as understanding the mark schemes. So there are two types of mark scheme, effectively. There are points-based questions and there are levels-based questions. So we're going to have a look at the difference between those. We will practice using those mark schemes for marking student works, and we're actually using exemplars from real student responses that have been marked by the senior team, and we'll have a look at those together as well, of course, as looking at that support that is provided by Pearson for all the qualifications, but in particular for A-level economics. We'll look at those assessment and those exemplars, and we'll have opportunity to network, share ideas. You've got that chat so you can discuss with one another as we go through. What I will say, Claire's put a message on about accessing materials. You will be using the delegate booklet that's in the resources. Probably about half an hour, I think we will use that for the first time. You must have that, because without that you won't understand what we're talking about. So please make sure you download the delegate booklet for use in a little while. So welcome to Pearson. And we're going to start just with an overview of Pearson Edexcel, which is the world's leading learning company and the UK's largest awarding organisation, best placed to provide qualifications allied to the British educational system, with an international heritage which stretches back over 150 years. So we partner with schools, we partner with universities, and we partner with employers worldwide, offering that world-class, globally recognised set of qualifications to over 3.5 million students every year. Straight into the assessment overview, as promised. And initially, we're looking at units 1 and 2 and the assessment for those AS units. So these are assessed using 2 externally examined papers. Oh, sorry, jumping ahead there. So Markets and Action Unit 1 and Macroeconomic Policy, Performance and Policy Unit 2. They both have a time for the exam paper of 1 hour and 3/4. So that is 15 minutes longer than the legacy specification, so slightly longer there, 1 hour and 5 minutes, that is, just to allow that little bit more thinking time as well as answering the questions. So the breakdown of the assessment for those 2 units, it's exactly the same for Unit 1 as it is for Unit 2. There are 4 sections, A, B, C, D. Section A is worth 6 marks and has 6 questions, each of which is a multiple choice question worth 1 mark each. Section B is worth 20 marks, and that has 5 questions, each worth 4 marks. Section C is out of 34, so the most marks for any of the sections on these two, on the paper for these 2 units. And that has 5 questions, but they have different mark tariffs. So it's broken down into 5 different questions, each with a different command word. And the source booklet that goes with the exam paper contains all the information to support students answering these questions, and the marks for each of those are 2, 4, 6, 8 and 14 marks. We will look at that in a little bit more detail as we go through today's session, but basically saying that the 2, 4, 6 and 8 mark questions are points based, whereas the 14 mark question is a levels based question. As I say, we're going to be focusing on that in today's session. And then the last section, D, there is 1 question which is worth the 20 marks, which is the whole section D, and that is an essay. But the students have a choice of 2 essays that they can write about, but they only write 1 essay. So the rest of the A-level assessment, so that the A-level students will, of course, need to do units 1 and 2 as well, but 3 and 4, which are not taken by AS candidates, but the full A-level students, they will take units 3 and 4 as well. And these are also assessed using externally examined papers, and they are 2 hours each in duration. Unit 3 is business behaviour, Unit 4, developments in the global economy. And the breakdown for these units, just 3 sections this time. Section A is pretty much the same idea as units 1 and 2. It's 6 marks and there are 6 questions, multiple choice questions, each worth 1 mark. There is not the 5 times 4 mark questions that we had in units 1 and 2. Section B instead is what is effectively section C in units 1 and 2, with that 5 question with the 2, 4, 6, 8 and 14 mark tariff, giving you a total of 34 marks. And the 20 marks that is missing from unit 1 and 2, if you like, that is all combined in section C, where instead of 1 essay, then 2 essays are required. There are 3 options and 2 essays are needed, each worth 20 marks to give us that total of 40 for section C. So half the marks on the papers for units 3 and units 4 are coming from section C. So assessment objectives, I mentioned that in the agenda, what we're going to look at. So we are going to spend some time focusing on that and looking at that, particularly with the student responses that we'll come on to in a little while. Now, there are 4 assessment objectives, which we refer to as AOs, and they basically correlate with the skills you can see here on the screen. So knowledge is AO1, application AO2, analysis AO3, and evaluation AO4. And we can see a weighting for each of these on this slide here. Now this is actually shown in the specification as well, so if you want to look at this at your leisure, you will see this in the specification, and you can see there those AOs that I've just mentioned, and a bit more of a description rather than just saying knowledge for AO1. We can see it's to demonstrate knowledge of terms, concepts, theories and models to show an understanding of the behaviour of economic agents. And you will see that there is a much higher percentage of AO1 in the AS qualification rather than overall in the full A level. And that is reversed when you get down to AO4, evaluate economic arguments and use appropriate evidence to support informed judgments. Here it's 20% in the AS, whereas overall in the A level, it's 25%. So you can see that they switch over, the focus, the concentration, the weighting is higher in the A2 units for AO3 and AO4. Broadly speaking, if you look at that overall percentage in the A level, you can see, yeah, roughly 25%, slightly more, slightly less in some cases, but you can see they're all vitally important. So all those skills are needed to do well in the qualification. But this is useful to make your students aware of, so that they know, for example, that, you know, if they've only got the knowledge, they might have a fantastic memory at looking at a textbook, but that alone is not going to get them particularly high grades, because they're going to need to apply that knowledge to the various concepts that are presented. They're going to need to analyse, to have that chain of reasoning, and they're going to need to evaluate, to be able to look at counter arguments and alternative viewpoints, in order to fully show that they have got that understanding and those skills required for the qualification. So we focus a little bit more here on AO1, knowledge. So you can see here a reminder of what we've just looked at about what AO1 is: knowledge of terms, concepts, theories and models to show an understanding of the behaviour of economic agents. And then there's just a little bit of an idea about where that might come from, talking about definitions or formula. So for example, if there's a calculate question, then showing understanding of the formula would come in there. But it's also things like the diagrams, so basic diagrams, and that might be showing the initial equilibrium on a supply and demand curve, for example, with the axes and curves labelled correctly. Whereas if a diagram is drawn and we don't have that correct labelling, it's not fully showing the skill of knowledge. And so perhaps marks for AO1 would be lower or not at all if some of that is missing. So basic diagrams, that includes showing correct labelling. When it comes to AO2, an application, so this is using that knowledge and understanding in context. So there will be data, there are extracts in the exam paper, and that needs to be utilised to answer the questions. And we will see some examples of questions where we have that application and those marks come through, and where it's really important that students are using that in order to answer the questions, and how they can pick up the marks from doing so. That's all to provide examples and how to illustrate the points they're making. In some cases, that can come from their own knowledge as well. The question will direct accordingly. And calculations, this is a good way to kind of get your students used to applying their knowledge, because if they're using the figures that are in an extract, that is actually applying when they're doing the calculations. So if they're taking those figures from the extract and using them in their answer, that is the same idea as if they're using some of the narrative that's in the extract. So to try and get them more familiar with doing that. We do find application is something that students can struggle with, and that's why I suggest that as the calculation is a way to just introduce it, to hopefully get them more familiar with it. Now, analysis, this is where we're looking at having appropriate theories and concepts to the context and that chain of reasoning. So sometimes students will miss out on attaining higher grades because they give us more of a list of points, which may be true, but if they haven't got the analysis there, then it's not fully going to be answering some of the questions asked. So a chain of reasoning is explaining the cause, it's explaining the consequence, it's giving us a linked development to the scenario, why one particular situation might cause something else and the consequences of that. So why is that the case? It can be demonstrated through use of diagrams as well as a narrative, but if diagrams are used, they need to be fully explained and integrated into the analysis, not just a standalone diagram without having anything to back it up and explain why that is helping answer the question. So to continue looking at the analysis for AO3, so explanations of a situation or an issue or a problem with that logical sequence of linked ideas. So X is the case, why is that the case, and what might that lead to? And then there's some sort of keywords that we will see where analysis is present, therefore, thus, and so, because, if, that means that. And strong analysis will show understanding that it might happen or it could happen, rather than saying this will mean that. Candidates understand typically it is not definite, and therefore could, can, might will typically show stronger analysis. When it comes to AO4 and the evaluation, so this, again, like the analysis, needs to be in the context of the question, not just generic points. We do see responses where candidates will maybe say, right, well, I'm going to start with AO1, I'll put some knowledge in, some sort of definition. That's fine. It may or may not pick up marks. It depends on the question type. But then they will try to put their application in as a separate thing and then go on to do the analysis and the evaluation. Application needs to be part of the analysis and the evaluation. It is not a separate thing. If it's put in separately, it's likely that it's just something that's repeated from the extract that the exam paper has provided to them. That is not going to be appropriately applying it. So the analysis and the evaluation should be in conjunction with that application. So in the context of the question. And it might involve things like the magnitude of the change or the consequence. So yes, this situation may occur, and they've gone on to analyse to say the cause, the consequence, the chain of events that are leading to that in context. But why might that occur to a lesser extent, or perhaps it's to do with the time frame? In the short run, it might occur to a certain extent. In the longer run, it might be slightly different. And a measurement of issues. So that might be to do with other economic factors that have an influence that might reduce the effect of something, for example. Of course, it will depend on the topic area. It will depend on the situation. But these are some of the ways that evaluation may occur. So the counter argument, the other viewpoint, that's what we're looking for evaluation. Evaluation will also look at possibly looking at an informed judgment. So for the 20-mark essay questions, we're looking for leading to a conclusion or informed judgment. So you've got the two sides, you've got the analysis and the evaluation giving us our alternate viewpoints, and then leading to that informed judgment on the 20-mark essay questions. Some other ideas of what evaluation might lead up to that point, well, critical awareness, the different viewpoints that we've said, and the quality of the evidence. So it might be that it's an argument that's been presented, but perhaps the evidence is not likely to be as strong or substantially backed up, and therefore that might limit the consequences of what's occurring. Underlying assumptions as well. So these are all sort of different ways in which evaluation can occur. And as I say, leading to that informed judgment on the 20-mark essay questions. Now, part of the exam papers, we look at quantitative skills. These are in all of the assessments at level 2 maths. And there is a list of these QS in the specification, so you could have a look at each of those in turn, and I highly recommend practicing them with your class to make sure that they're capable of for example, look at QS1 of doing ratios, calculating ratios and fractions, so they understand them and that they are capable of answering any questions that relate to these QS. They will typically be linked to certain parts of the specification, some more obviously than others. I mean, QS8, obviously it says elasticity, but you've got things like QS6, the costs, revenues and profits. So it's giving you an indication where those might come in. But you can see things like, I mean, QS2, percentages and percentage point change, that could refer to quite a few different areas of the specification. So practicing these in their own right is a good way to make sure students are better prepared for wherever they might come on the exam papers. And the QS list does go on. There are some additional ones showing there on the screen, but as I say, these are in the specification, so we don't need to spend too much time looking at them here, just so you are familiar and aware that they exist. And they are, it's really important that students are going through them, because they will be on all exam papers. They're on every unit. They can be in multiple choice questions, for example, calculating a percentage change. They can be in the short answer questions, section B on units 1 and 2, where there are questions with the command words calculate and illustrate. So those will typically have, they will be full of QS, because the whole calculation requires those QS to take place, as does drawing the basic diagram with the illustrate questions. However, they're also present, as there will be some marks relevant in the data response and the extended response questions, where there will be some QS required as part of the evidence to support all those assessment objectives that we've just been looking at. So all very relevant and useful to make sure your students are familiar with each of those skills that we just looked at. So we've had a look at AOs, and we did indeed spend more time on that in the first module. So as I say, we needed that recap, and anybody that missed that first module, then it's just something to be aware of, and make sure you can look at the specification. But we are now going to focus on where those AOs are assessed and how they come about in the actual question paper. So we're going to look at the structure of the papers by assessment objective and per question. So starting with the multiple choice questions. Now, this is referring particularly to units 1 and 2. It's slightly different when we get to the multiple choice in units 3 and 4. So as we said before, section A, units 1 and 2, there are 6 questions, and each one is worth 1 mark. Now, if you were to look at any of the past papers, and there are many, many of those on the website now, because we've had quite a lot of series, but also in the SAMs, the sample assessment materials, and you will see that there are those 6 questions. 3 of them are testing AO1 knowledge, and 3 of them are testing AO2 application. So an activity here for you, and it's suggesting looking at the SAMS question from Unit 1, which has the code WEC11. That's how we know it's Unit 1. Which AO is being tested in questions 1, 2, 5 and 6. Now, I appreciate you won't all have the SAMs in front of you. It was in the packs for Module 1. It's on the website as well. You will be able to access the sample assessment materials on the Pearson Edexcel website, but I will read out the question just so you can have a think about what it might be. So just so you've got some sort of an idea. So question 1, so if you are able to look at the SAMs, if you want to make a note of it, to have a look back at these yourselves when you get opportunity. So page 6 to 8 of the sample assessment materials shows you these multiple choice questions for Unit 1. So question 1, firstly, it gives you 2 statements. Statement 1, countries should impose indirect taxes of 20% on sugary drinks. Statement 2, 39% of adults worldwide were overweight in 2014, 11% of men and 15% of women were classified as obese. And then the question, which one of the following best describes the two statements above? I won't go through the ABCD answers, but just to say that this is a straightforward asking for knowledge, and so it is an example of an AO1 knowledge requirement in that question. The same is the case for question 2. This is AO1 as well. This is which one of the following is an example of market failure? And it goes on to give you 4 descriptions and the correct answer, a market bubble caused by speculators, which leads to house prices rising. So those are testing AO1 knowledge. So they're testing knowledge of concepts. And this is why I'm suggesting you maybe have a look at these when you have more time to do so, and perhaps even with your students, because you can often find that helping them to recognise things like that, they're not going to be wasting time on multiple choice because it's a straightforward check the right box. However, if they're familiar with the assessment objectives and what's being tested, it can help them to identify how much they need to write for something. So just to compare that and look at the difference. So as I say, the questions are pages 6 to 8 of the sample assessment materials, and the question 5, this is an AO2 example. So the price of a litre of rapeseed oil increased by 7% in August 2016. Over the same period, the quantity demanded decreased by 5% and the quantity demanded of sunflower oil increased by 3%. Ceteris paribus, the cross elasticity of demand for sunflower oil following a price change in rapeseed oil is equal to, and then there are 4 values given. So that is AO2 application because it requires the student to look at the data in order to do a calculation. So it's not just a straightforward concept, there is that application required to link it to the points. And question 6, similarly, AO2, its application. So we've got a table there, and we're looking at the estimated PED for various food items in the USA, and that table shows the food item and the elasticities, so estimates of PED. And then the question, which one of the following can be deduced from the table? And the correct answer is an increase in the price of milk will cause less than proportionate decrease in the quantity demanded. And that's because they have an estimate of PED of minus 0.1, allowing the candidate to apply their knowledge of price elasticity of demand in order to decide upon the correct answer. So hopefully by looking at those different types of multiple choice question, then you will be able to show your candidates the differences between direct knowledge and showing that understanding of the concepts and where application is required. So that's what we have for multiple choice questions in units 1 and 2. Units 3 and 4, as I said earlier, also have multiple choice questions in section A, but this time analysis, AO3, is present for some of the questioning. So only one of the multiple choice questions will be that AO1 concept knowledge required. 2 of them will be for AO2 application, but 3 of those questions will be targeting AO3 analysis. So the analysis side of it is where we're looking for that impact, that link. So it's something else to have a look at the different types of question that are showing in the sample assessment materials, as well as any of the past papers from units 3 and 4, and look at those different types of question, and you can pinpoint there what type of question is AO3 analysis, in addition to those we've just looked at for AO1 and AO2. Okay. Just to give you a bit more of an idea, page 84 in the sample assessment materials will give you some of those examples if you want to have a look at when we have a bit more time. Now, I know we've got a question come through from Abigail. As I say, I'm hopefully going to cover everything as we go through. I will just try and pause to just cover this one because it is particularly relevant to this. So just in case you can't see the chat, thanks, Abigail. If a student chooses relevant context from the data given, but then uses incorrect knowledge or analysis evaluates, do they lose AO2 marks? Well, it's always positive marking, so candidates will never lose marks. It's always a case of accepting what they've given. If it's answering the question, if it's relevant, then they can gain credit for that. If there's something incorrect, then as long as it's not detracting from their response. So for example, if the answer, if you're doing a calculation of PED and they put it both ways around, for example, clearly they're hedging the bets and they can't then be credited. But if it's something that's not taking away from what they have given that is correct, then we will always positively mark. So we're not taking anything away. If there's an error shown, then of course they won't get credit for it, but they don't lose marks for it. We don't deduct anything from it. Okay, so that I think is that's a really important point to note. So thanks for that question, Abigail. Okay, so we're moving on to look at section B on units 1 and 2 now. So this is just in the short answer section B, which is only present on units 1 and 2. There are 5 questions and each one is worth 4 marks. And you can see here the assessment objective breakdown for those 5 questions. AO1 knowledge, there are 6 marks available for knowledge. There are 10 marks available for application across these 5 questions, and there are 4 marks available for analysis across these 5 4-mark questions. So that is always the case for every Unit 1 and every Unit 2 exam paper. However, they're not necessarily in the same order, so it's important to sort of be familiar about how to answer certain questions, and it's all to do with the command word that's used. So I briefly mentioned before calculate or illustrate or draw, but there will also be explain questions for 4 marks. And there are 2 types of explain questions. So we're going to have a look at that in a little bit more detail now as well. Now, in the specification, on page 68, you will find an appendix which has the list of command words. This is arguably one of the most important pages in the specification, because all those command words are the ones you will see on the paper, and that's all that will be seen on the paper, and they have the number of marks for each command word, and they have the requirements of the students next to them. So it's really, really important that students get to grips with what those mean and what is required of them. So for example, calculate assesses quantitative skills, which we just looked at. It requires a calculation involving several stages based on given data. Okay, so that's data presented to them that they have to then put into a formula and do the calculation. This might involve the use of a prescribed diagram or formula. Calculators may be used, and students are advised to show workings. That is really, really important, because under exam pressure, it's very easy to copy down the wrong answer from the calculator. And if there's no calculation shown, just the final answer, and that is incorrect, that will be 0 marks. However, if the workings are shown and that error is still copied down from the calculator, then there are still marks to be gained from the calculations if they are correct. So it's really a good idea to encourage students to always show their workings. They have to do that calculation anyway, and so let's not mess that up. Let's make sure we've got the opportunity to get as many marks as possible. Explain questions, this is the key thing, and you will see there are two types of explain question, and these are highlighted here in the specification on page 68. There are knowledge and application explain questions when asking students to explain a term or the characteristics. So that's requiring knowledge, understanding, and application. Whereas explain questions that are wanting an explanation of a reason or an impact, that also includes analysis. Excuse me. It requires a two-stage chain of reasoning. So therefore, we have 1 mark for knowledge, 1 mark for application, and 2 marks for analysis. Now, those are the only questions in this section B that have AO3 marks for them. Only the explain a reason or explain an impact question. So those 4 marks for AO3 analysis will come from 2 times the explain an impact question. Okay, the other marks the other questions do not have analysis in them, and so they will not come from those types of question. And we can see that on this next slide. So these are the different types of question that we have. And you can see there, as I just said, the explain why or how, which is that impact that we're looking for, that 2-stage chain of reasoning, just AO3 analysis coming from that. Whereas knowledge and application can come from the calculate, draw, and the explain what type questions. Now you can work it out from what we have here as to the questions we're going to have. So in other words, we have we know we've got 2 of the explain why or explain how type questions out of those 5 questions that are in there. That only leaves us with 3 other questions left. There has to be 1 of the explain what type questions, because that's 2 plus 2, and it has to be 2 of the calculate and or draw questions, because that's 1 plus 3. So there will always be 2 explain why or how questions, 1 explain what question, and then 2 of the calculate or draw questions. That doesn't mean there will always be 2 that calculates or 2 draw or 1 of each. It can be a mixture of any of those, but at least that gives you an idea what we're looking for. And as I say, have a look at the SAMs, have a look at any of the past papers, and to get familiar with what those types of questions are. The breakdown of the assessment objectives is shown in the mark schemes, so you can see for each of those question types what we're looking for from the assessment objectives. Moving on to look at an activity for you here. So it refers back to that last slide, and we're saying to have a look at questions 7, 8 and 9 in the SAMs, which I will read out to you if you haven't got sight of it, and to identify the assessment objective being targeted for each question. So question 7 of the sample assessment materials, this is on page 9, and this says, to support the income of rice farmers, the Indian government introduced a guaranteed minimum price in 2016. Draw a diagram to illustrate the impact of the introduction of the minimum price on the market for rice. So looking back at this slide that I've put back up for you, the command word is draw. So straight away, you can recognise that the assessment objectives for this question, there is 1 mark for knowledge and 3 marks for application. That will always be the case for draw questions, or questions with the command word draw, or illustrate. Draw or illustrate is the same, 1 mark knowledge, 3 marks application. So as soon as your student sees that command word, that's what they're looking for. They don't need to worry too much, of course, about that. If they know they're drawing a diagram, okay, well, what diagram is it they need? That is what they're focusing on. But it does mean they don't need that narrative. They don't need a written explanation to tell us about the diagram. They need the accurately drawn diagram with correct labelling. That's how the marks are picked up. Why is that important? Well, we all know that there's a finite amount of time to complete the exam paper, so we don't want anybody wasting time putting extra information that they can't gain marks for. So draw questions, 1 mark for knowledge, 3 marks for application. Question 8, which is on page 10 of the sample assessment materials. In the European Union, if a bank fails and has to be closed down, an individual's deposits are guaranteed up to €100,000 by the individual's government. With reference to the market for banking, explain what is meant by the term moral hazard. So here we've got the command word explain. It's an explain what question. Straight away we can see 1 mark, sorry, the AO1 is 2 marks, AO2 is application, and that is 2 marks as well. So the 4 marks for that question are 2 knowledge, 2 application. And I suggest having a look at the mark scheme at the same time. If you're having a look at this with your students, the mark scheme is page 32 for that particular question. And then just to give you an example of an explain why question, there's a little bit of a STEM again. In 2016, the Regional Public Goods Initiative provided grants of $9.45 million to fund public goods across Latin America and the Caribbean. Explain why governments have to fund the provision of public goods. So this is an explain why question. 1 mark for knowledge, 1 mark for application, and 2 marks for analysis. So it's explaining the impact of something, the reason for something, and so it has those link stages, and that's where the analysis comes in. The mark scheme for question 9 is page 32 of the SAMs, whereas the question is on page 11. So all useful activities to have a look at with your students to hopefully help them get to grips with the different requirements for the different command words present in the exam paper. So having a look at the command words for section C on units 1 and 2, and this is for section B in units 3 and 4. And we said there are 5 question types for each of these data response sections. And the breakdown of those is shown on this slide. So AO1 knowledge is present in all questions, and there are 2 marks for each of those. We'll look at the discussed questions separately, but for the knowledge, there are 2 marks for define, explain what questions, analyse and examine. Application is also present in all 4 of those, 2 marks again for each of those, whereas analysis is only coming in for analyse and examine questions. And the evaluation is only present out of those 4 points-based questions, is only present in the examine question, which is worth 8 marks in total. The discuss question is a levels-based question, which we'll look at separately, as I say, the mark scheme for levels-based questions. And this does not have a breakdown of the assessment objectives separately. It groups together knowledge, application and analysis to give you a total of 8 marks for all 3 of those skills combined. That the response is marked holistically, and a mark out of 8 is given for those 3 skills combined according to a level descriptor table. Again, we'll look at an example shortly. Evaluation is tested as well, and again that is using a level descriptor table, but evaluation is looked at separately to the other 3 skills and a descriptor table excuse me, out of the 6 marks available. So the command words are still used as in page 68 of the specification, and the same requirements that we've looked at so far, but they are tested according to those assessment objectives you can see there on the slide. Now the essay, which is section D on AS units 1 and 2, and it's section C on units 3 and 4, excuse me. And each of these essays is worth 20 marks. It has the same breakdown, whichever unit it's in. It has a level descriptor table, again grouping those knowledge, application and analysis skills out of 12 marks. And that's assessed over 4 levels. We will look at an example so you can see what those 4 levels are. And again, it's holistic marking. So overall, what does that essay, how does that match the descriptors in the table for those AO1, AO2 and AO3 skills? If it's doing a really good job of matching all of the descriptors, it will progress higher and get into the top level. The evaluation, again, is a separate table that is assessed over 3 levels and has a maximum mark of 8 out of the 20. Of course, adding those two together to give you the 20 marks, 12 and 8 possible for each of the tables. The command words will be evaluate or to what extent. So I've talked a little bit about mark schemes, and I've mentioned there are 2 different types. So we're going to have a look at what those different types are. So initially, as you can see here on the screen, mark schemes, and there are many examples you can see on the website from past papers. They are going to give you effectively the answers to the question, but you've got to remember that there are a number of possible options that students could give. Sure, if it's a calculate question, then yes, we're going to be looking for the same thing. But when it comes to the extended responses, the essays, the data response questions even, then it's likely there's going to be quite a range of ideas. So it's indicative of what candidates might say. It's a case of, okay, they might say this, but they might say something else, and they can be equally of merit as long as it is the answer that is correct, and they are showing examples of where we have those skills that we've been looking at. So it's not just a case of generic knowledge, then we are also looking for them to be applied, to be analysed, and in many cases to be evaluated. So they show the examiner what should be rewarded, what should not be rewarded, and they also give us an idea about encouragement of that positive marking, which I mentioned briefly before. We're looking to reward marks for what is there. We're not penalising students for what is not there. So it's always positive marking. It's always trying to give credit where that is to be rewarded. Now on the points-based mark schemes, so remember this is many of the earlier sections, so of course, yes, multiple choice, but we're particularly talking about section B, where in the AS units, where we have those 4 mark questions, and the data responses, all questions in the data response, except for that 14 mark question. 2, 4, 6 and 8 marks on the points-based mark scheme is used, where it is a specific number of marks for the AOs being tested. That means that even if there is more knowledge presented than is asked for, even if it's correct, there are only a certain number of marks available. And so if the student just gives us more of that, they can only gain whatever number of knowledge marks are available. They can't gain any more than that, even if they're putting correct information. And that's really important, because that could be wasting time. They're not going to be losing marks if they've given us more accurate information, but it's taking time away from themselves for what they could be using to answer essay questions, for example. So it's really important that they get to grips with that, and they're not wasting their own time putting things down they're not going to pick up marks for. So to access the marks instead, that's why they need to understand these assessment objectives and what is being tested, what is required from them. Now, this is an example of a points-based mark scheme for a 4-mark question. So it's 12B, it's coming from one of those 4-mark questions in section B of one of the AS units. With reference to figure 1, explain the term real GDP growth. So explain the term. So we know, therefore, it's going to be an explain what or an explain how question. So it's not got any analysis in there. It's just 2 marks for knowledge. It's just 2 marks for the application. And what we're looking for here is the 2 knowledge marks are gained for giving a definition of the key term in the question. And there's a suggestion there in the mark scheme of what that might be. It's probably not going to deviate too much from this, but it might not be exactly that and could still score the 2 marks. The application comes from using relevant references to the data that's presented in the exam paper. So the use of information in the question, not just copying it, but actually using it to answer the question. So that will be where the application marks come from. Anything else is not going to pick up the marks. So if they give us 2 different definitions but no application, it can only score 2 out of 4 marks because 2 of those marks have to come from application. Equally, if there's no definition and all it is material application from the data given, it can only score the marks for application. It has to be the breakdown according to the assessment objectives. Now, we see here looking for exemplar answers. So using the mark scheme for this question, decide how many marks each of the 2 exemplar answers would receive. So we can look back at the mark scheme, and this is where I'm referring you for the first time to the delegate booklet. So this is what I said you did need to have for this presentation. So if you look at the delegate booklet, and you will see there are exemplars for its questions 12B, which has come from Unit 2, WEC 1-2. And as I go back to that previous slide, it has this question with reference to figure 1, explain the term real GDP growth. And you've got 2 examples. They're only short, but have a look at that and have a think about what marks they might get for AO1 and AO2. We'll just go quiet for a minute while you have a look at that. So you're looking at the delegate booklet, which you can download from the resources. If you can't find it, don't worry. We don't have an awful lot of time on each section, so we'll be going through it in a moment anyway. Leaving the mark scheme up here for you for those who have got the delegate booklet in front of them. And if you're having a look at those 2 responses, we'll just have a look at those in a moment. So here we go. This is the first exemplar. So exemplar 1, and you have that showing on the slide here. So marks are not deducted if they haven't completely been able to provide an accurate definition, as is the case here. They can still access the application marks. So there's a question that came through just before. So as we can see here, they have got 1 mark for knowledge, and they are getting still both marks for the application. So this response, it's got a partial understanding. It hasn't fully been able to provide the accurate definition, but it has got everything we're looking for application. So 3 marks in total, 1 for knowledge, AO1, 2 for application, AO2. The second exemplar that's in the delegate booklet, this gets all 4 marks. This is what we're looking for. It has indeed got appropriate definition. It includes percentage increase and adjusted for inflation, whereas the previous one only had adjusted for the effects of inflation. So this time it's getting both knowledge marks instead of just 1, like response 1. And the second paragraph gives us our data references, so does indeed achieve both application marks. So you've got there 2 examples where they're both getting the application marks, but the difference in the definition is shown as to why there's only 1 mark for application, sorry, for knowledge in exemplar 1, but 2 in exemplar 2. Now, when we're looking at the explain why or explain how questions for 4 marks, which as we've seen, these are AO2, AO1 and AO2, and AO3 for analysis, then this time we've got a slightly different breakdown from what we've been looking at so far. There's only 1 mark now for knowledge and only 1 mark for application. Half the marks on these questions are coming for that analysis. So it's the link chain, the impact that we're looking for. And that's why it's important to be able to understand the difference. So noting that assessment objective breakdown is key for helping students to score full marks on these questions. So here's a question for you on the slide. New Zealand has a population of 4,693 million people. In 2017, its net migration was 73,000, with more individuals arriving than leaving the country. Explain 1 possible impact on the level of unemployment of this net migration. So the question doesn't say explain why, it doesn't say explain how, but it's that type of question. However, this is where it's key to looking at what the requirements are for the command words. So an explain why question is looking for that 2-stage chain of reasoning. It's an explanation of a reason or an impact. And this is asking for that impact. And that's why that understanding of these types of question will help your students to be able to put what they need to, not just a definition and a link to the data, but that chain of reasoning, just a short 2-stage chain, but that's what's required by these types of question. This particular question, by the way, comes from Unit 2, June 2019. So if you're wanting to look back for that on the website, and we do indeed have this in the delegate booklet as well. So this is why it's important that you are using your delegate booklet to help you go through it. But well, we've got most of it on the slides if you are struggling to download it for any reason. So the activity, it's question 8 in the exam paper. That's where it refers to question 8 here on the slide. So in the pack, you will see the mark scheme and you will see 2 responses. Have a look at those, use the mark scheme and compare the 2 responses. We'll put them on the slides as well in a moment to have a look. Which one do you think is the better response? And what marks would you give for the knowledge the application and the analysis for each answer. Now I'll just go quiet for you to have a look at that. I'll just put the question back up for you there as well, though. Okay, so let's skip forward. And we have here exemplar answer 1. So this is in the delegate booklet, and hopefully you've had a look through that and you've decided that that is not as good as the other example. This scored 2 out of 4 marks. And the reason for that, so we have the first sentence, which is a definition, and that did score 1 mark for knowledge. The second sentence uses the data, and that scores 1 mark for application. However, it scores 0 out of 2 for the analysis. The second paragraph is not providing us that linked chain of reasoning. It's just supposition, and so it's 2 out of 4 in total. The second response, the better response, this gets all 4 marks. So the first sentence, we have a definition of unemployment. So that's getting 1 mark for knowledge. The second sentence would also have scored a definition mark, but we've already allocated the knowledge mark that's available. So it cannot access any more knowledge marks. Third sentence, though, it does go on and gives us some application. So it's scoring the application mark there. And then both analysis marks are given for the reasoned argument that comes next. So 1, 1, 2 in terms of AO breakdown, giving us a score of 4 out of 4. So some key points to look out for when we're looking at explain questions, as you can see here on the screen. So check the wording of the explain questions to determine whether it's an explain what question or an explain why or how question. Does it need that link? Does it need that chained reasoning? If it does, then it's looking for an impact, for example, then that's where the analysis comes in. And that assessment objective breakdown is shown there. This is where practice comes in. Practice looking at the types of question in the exam papers and having a go at answering them to make sure candidates can pick up all of the marks available. So the analyse questions. So in the data response, section C on units 1 and 2, section B on units 3 and 4, there is one analyse question and it's always worth 6 marks. It always has the breakdown of 2 marks for knowledge, AO1, 2 marks for application, AO2, and 2 marks for analysis, AO3. It will always be the case that those marks are designated in that way. And that's why, again, practice can be helpful to make sure your students are familiar with that. So an example with reference to extract A, analyse one macroeconomic effect of the reduction of indirect tax. The assessment objectives would be applied, as you can see, for those 3 different skills: knowledge, application and analysis. And there's an example there that comes from the mark scheme of how that breakdown would occur. Now, you may want to revisit this, of course, in your own time, and in which case, just to point you in the right direction, it's Unit 2, so WEC 1-2, it's question 12C. So that's coming from section C of the Unit 2 paper, June 2019. Now, any analyse question will give you this breakdown, but this particular question with the indicative content that you can see there on the slide. The examine question, which will always be out of 8 marks, and that will always have the assessment breakdown that you can see here on the screen. And you can see that it's the same as the analyse question, with the exception of those additional 2 marks, which are coming from AO4 evaluation. So as I say, always the same. So any examine question, and there will be 1 on each paper, 1 on each unit. In units 1 and 2, it's section C. In units 3 and 4, it's section B. But there will always be 1 8-mark examine question, or the command word is examine. And that is the breakdown. Again, look at any past paper to see an example of that. And as I say, it's very similar to those analyse question, but it must include evaluation if it's to score full marks. That evaluation can be gained in 2 different ways. It's only short, remember, this is not like the levels-based questions, which we're going to look at in more detail shortly, because there are only 2 marks for evaluation here, instead of having the whole descriptor table for evaluation. So the 2 marks can be gained by either making 1 point and developing it, or stating 2 brief evaluative comments. So for points-based evaluation, and this is the only question that has that, then this is how those evaluation marks can be scored. So as I say, analyse questions, there are no evaluation marks. Examine, which are questions requiring evaluation, there are 2 AO4 evaluation marks. So applying the points-based mark scheme for an examine question, with reference to extract B, examine the external costs resulting from increasing meat production. 2 exemplar responses in the delegate booklet, of which the annotation is showing and the mark scheme would be applied. And the first example is coming up. So have a look at the delegate booklet, the next question along. And I'll go through this in just a moment. So hopefully this will answer your question in the chat as well. So you can see exemplar 1. So we have here the student response, and you can see in red how the senior team have marked it. So we have, there's only 1 mark for a definition of external costs. So remember, there are 2 knowledge marks available, 2 application marks, 2 analysis marks, and 2 evaluation marks. Only 1 knowledge mark here for that definition of external costs. For a second knowledge mark, there needs to be some further development to that definition, to that term. It goes on and it gives us 3 data references of external costs of meat production. But of course, only 1 here is developed to gain analysis marks. Now, remember, there are 2 marks for application. So the fact it's giving us 3 pieces of application, it can still only pick up 2 marks for application. So it's got 1 knowledge mark because it's not developed the definition. So 1 out of 2 for that. It's given us 3 points of application, but it can only score 2 application marks. So it's 2 out of 2, but the time that it's spent with that extra application could have been better spent elsewhere on the paper. Only 1 of those points has been developed. So you're saying how many analysis points? 2. There are 2 marks. We need 2 pieces of analysis in there, 2 developments. Only 1 has been provided here, and there is no evaluation. If you remember a couple of slides ago, I showed you evaluation. Those 2 marks can come from either 2 separate points or 1 point that is developed. There is no evaluation present here, and so this scores 4 out of 8, nothing for evaluation, and it's missing out on 1 knowledge mark and 1 analysis mark. Example 2. This example is better. You will see the example has actually got a repeated section in the delegate booklet. I don't know why that's in. It's not going to score any more marks just because it's in twice. However, it does have 2 points of knowledge in there, so it's picking up both knowledge marks for AO1. It's got the analysis, the application in there, sorry, so it's getting the 2 application marks, and it's getting the analysis marks as well. The evaluation I don't think is showing in the delegate booklet. The full response did do it, and I think that duplication of the material has gone in instead of putting the evaluation in there. There are, however, examples on the website. There are lots of examples of student responses that have been marked by the senior team, so you can have a look at those to see the full explanations and where the full mark responses are coming from. Now, some of the issues that have come through from responses that have been marked over the last few years and all the series that have been available. These are some of the key things that you can have a look at on the slide here. And that spending too much time is one of those key things where students are doing things that are not needed, or they've already picked up the marks for certain points, and therefore they're not going to pick up those marks. Those skills have only got a finite number of points. They cannot score any more marks. So as I say, it's always positive marking. We're not taking marks away, but it does mean less time available to answer the other questions. So it's a key thing to practice. So not be wasting time doing things that are not going to score any marks. Definitions may be imprecise. That's going to mean missing out on those marks as well. Or it might be that application marks are not given because they don't relate to the context. So there are no examples. So students miss out, or they lose them for doing that. Analysis marks, there's no linked explanation of the point that's being made. So that needs to be brief. It doesn't need to be in detail like it does for the levels-based questions, but nonetheless, it needs to be present. We need some linked explanation of the point that's being made. And the evaluation in those examine questions, that 1 8-mark examine question on each paper, if evaluation is omitted, they are not going to score those 2 marks that are available for AO4. So key things to remind your students that they need to be doing. Now, the levels-based mark schemes, we're going to spend a fair bit of time on this and what's left of this session, looking at how this differs from those points-based questions we've spent all the time looking at so far. So the key things to note, these levels-based questions are only for questions with a mark tariff of 14 or 20 marks. So that means all essay questions, so that's the last section of all the papers, the final section, those essay questions, but it's also the 14-mark question of that data response, which you will have seen briefly when we looked at those data responses so far. Now, the marks are separate for evaluation. So we have 2 level descriptor tables for each of the types of question, and they have a grouping of application, knowledge and analysis, and then a separate table for evaluation. The descriptors in the 14-mark questions is slightly different to the 20-mark questions, but each of those has those 2 different level descriptor tables. Now, the mark schemes focus on the quality of student answers rather than the quantity of the points being made. So it's not about having a list, it's all to do with the quality. And you will see that from the level descriptors present for each of the questions. So the quality of the student answers is assessed according to those level descriptors in each table. And for those questions, the level-based criteria are used to determine the mark for, as we say, knowledge, application and analysis, and separately for evaluation. The level descriptor tables do not change series by series. So you can look at a level descriptor table from the past exam series and know that is going to be the one that's used in the next exam series that your students will be sitting. So initially we'll focus on the discuss question. So this is the data response question. It's section C of units 1 and 2. It's section B of units 3 and 4. And there is one 14-mark question in each of those sections. It can come anywhere in the data response. They're not in order necessarily of 2, 4, 6, 8 and then 14. It depends on how appropriately it fits, but it will always be in those particular sections. There is always only one, and it will, as I say, always have that same the same 2 level descriptor tables. The knowledge, application and analysis table will be out of 8 marks. The evaluation table will be out of 6 marks. The first table, there are 3 levels, and there are also 3 levels for evaluation. Now, the 20-mark essay questions, which is always the final section for any of the papers, out of 20 in total, but the knowledge, application and analysis is always out of 12 marks. The top level is level 4, because this is marked over 4 levels. The top level has a mark range of 10 to 12 marks. And as you can see on the slide, these are the criteria, these are the level descriptors that examiners are looking for to be able to reward the top level for an essay. So have a look at those criteria. So the first one, the accurate and precise knowledge and understanding, a key factor for being able to show their knowledge and understanding. Linking that knowledge understanding, putting it in context, is showing that the student is able to fully integrate their ideas to answer the question, and that it's not a generic response. And then the analysis. So analysis may be present, But for the level 4, the top level criteria, we're looking for it to be clear, coherent, relevant, and focused, to demonstrate logical and multi-stage chains of reasoning in terms of the cause and/or consequence. So the knowledge, application, and analysis may be present in a response, but this is showing the quality that's required of those 3 skills in order to be able to progress to the top level, level 4, for this grouping of assessment objectives. That analysis, another way of looking at, perhaps to provide a step-by-step explanation, including maybe diagrams if that is appropriate. Now, the evaluation, there are 3 levels in the 20-mark essay questions, and that top level, level 3, is worth 7 or 8 marks. And the descriptors for that top level, these are the criteria for achieving that top level of evaluation. Have a look at those on the screen. So that informed judgment, this is only the 20-mark essay questions. This criteria is not present in the 14-mark question on the data response. But as with the knowledge application and analysis table, the evaluation should be related to the context, not just a generic statement. If it's generic evaluation, it's unlikely to be rewarded with more than level 1. So this evaluation should go beyond identification of a point, but be supported with a chain of reasoning. So I say to my students that the evaluation is like the analysis, but the counter argument, the opposing side. It might be looking at an argument and analysing it, linked chain of reasoning in context, and then a counter argument to that with linked chains of reasoning in context. These should be of equal weighting to give us that balance, and it's showing us those 2 sides. And then in the 20-mark essays, come to a final decision, an informed judgment. Now, here's an example of a 20-mark question, which you can have a look at on the slide here. So there's a stem there with some information, and then you can see that command word evaluate. Evaluate the likely impact of the introduction of a maximum price for gas and electricity for that 20 marks. So this is an example that comes from Unit 1, WEC 11, from June 2019. So have a look at this. It's in the delegate booklet. The question is in the delegate booklet. So have a look at that, please. And then there are some examples of responses to that. There are 2 example responses in that. So that will take you a little bit of time to have a look through. So that question that's on the slide there is in the delegate booklet as well. And then the first example has 2 pages. The second example are clearly marked. The second example has several pages. One of those pages is duplicated again. So the first page you could ignore effectively of that, but then the whole response is together. So I'm going to go quiet for a little bit of time. It's almost past now, so I'm going to give us until 10:35 GMT. So that's about 8 minutes, and then I will talk again and come through and have a look at these 2 responses to see how they've been marked. Thank you everyone for your hard work in looking through those two examples. So we'll have a look at example 1. And incidentally, if you want to go back over the slides are alongside the delegate booklet in the resource materials, so you can access those as well, and the recording, which will be available via the same link from approximately an hour after the event finishes. Probably give it a tiny bit longer if you're going back to look at it. But yeah, you can access the delegate booklet with these exemplars and the slides in the resource materials. So example 1. Now, with this scored 12 out of 20, and you can see the breakdown here. For knowledge application and analysis, 8 out of 12, and for evaluation, 4 out of 8. So we'll look at this, we'll break it down to have a look. So the first example, the first 2 paragraphs contain basic information, just at level 1. So this is for knowledge application and analysis. The diagram and the analysis below it are at the top end of level 2, however. And then the first half of the second page contains some really sound knowledge application and analysis, which is good enough for level 3. The material on government failure and shadow markets was credited as evaluation at level 2. So that's how that was overall broken down. The way these are marked, and there's been a couple of questions about, well, what if the analysis is no good, but they've done well with knowledge and the application? Well, it's holistically marked. It's the same answer for any question. What if they've done application, but they haven't done analysis? What if their analysis is good, but it's only generic, they haven't got application? It's the same answer. Holistically, the examiner will look at knowledge, application, and analysis and find a best fit to the level descriptor tables. So they will say, okay, it might be strong knowledge, it might be strong application, it might be weak analysis. Holistically, that might be a partial match to one level and a partial match to another level. It's the best fit. So if it is strongly matching some of the criteria and not matching some of the criteria at all in a level, it's highly unlikely it will go to the top of the level because it's not matching some of the criteria. It might still stay in that level, a higher level, and just move towards the bottom end of the marks within that level, or it might be that it's not strong enough and it might move down a level. So even though some of the elements are being met, if some of them are not, holistically it might be that it needs to be a lower level. It depends on the response, it depends on the question, and it's all to do with the overall quality of the response. So it's not as if there's a certain number of marks for one skill and a certain number for another, and they're added up. It does not go back to points-based marking. It is always about the level and the overall quality of the response. So if they do some and not others, then it's only going to be partially matching the descriptors, and overall that is going to be the best fit as to where it fits into the level descriptor table. So as I say, example 1, it's getting 8 out of 12 for that first descriptor table, knowledge, application, analysis, and level 2 for evaluation. Example 2, the longer one that has several pages, it still ends up with 12 out of 20. Remember, it's not about the quantity that is written. It's scoring those marks slightly differently though. It's still the same levels, but this time it's 7 out of 12 for the knowledge, application and analysis. It's not quite as strong as that first example. However, the evaluation, although it's still level 2, that is slightly stronger than the first example. So if we're looking at example 2, And this time, the first page, we have a definition, a diagram, and a brief explanation, and that is getting it into level 2 for knowledge application and analysis. But the second page, we've got a repeat of the diagram, but then there is some good analysis, which is stronger than what we've seen so far, and that is pulling it up to level 3 of the knowledge application and analysis. The bottom of the second page and the first half of the third page, there is some more good analysis related to the content and now some evaluation. Then the second half of page 4 and on to page 5 provides some more relevant evaluation. And although it's rather generic in parts, it was considered to be good enough to get into level 2. So some of it, if it had all been generic, it would only have been down in level 1 for evaluation. But some of it is a little bit stronger than that, just enough to get into level 2 and the 5 marks out of 8 for evaluation. So overall, like I say, 12 out of 20 for response 2 or exemplar 2. One other thing that was being asked as well about, so we've talked about how it's holistic marking and how the levels are applied. The application, if a question directs a response to be linked to the data provided, then of course that's what it needs to do. However, if not, if it's something that the student has their own knowledge, they can use their own knowledge to apply, that will be credited as application, provided that that is not restricted in the question and provided, of course, that it is answering the question. But yes, unless the question directs otherwise, own knowledge can be used and can gain marks for application where it's relevant. So moving on to the support, and the support that is available to you as centres, as teachers, and to your students, to the candidates. You can see here that all different types of resources and support is available, covering everything from the planning, teaching and learning, the exam preparation and assessment, and result support as well. And it's not a case you have to ask everything now. There are contacts. I'm going to show you the contacts coming up shortly as how you can get in touch in the future, whether it's later on today, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's a week, a month's time. There is always a contact you can ask specific questions, general questions, anything to get that further information. So there's plenty of support and advice available to you. So we have, as I say, planning, teaching and learning. You can see several things here. I'm going to talk a little bit more about a couple of these in a moment. The exam prep and assessment. Have a look at the Pearson Edexcel website. There are hundreds and hundreds of pieces of information for you, continually being updated with things to help you. The exam materials, I have it open on a different screen. There are currently 187 items under exam materials. That is past papers, mark schemes, principal examiner reports, showing you for every series that has been to date, every paper, so you've got so many potential questions you can look at with the mark schemes, and the principal examiner reports. So the senior team have marked these, they've gone through the series, and the principal examiner has collated that information and explaining to you and to candidates why responses were marked the way they were, where students did well, where students didn't do well, any common mistakes, any things that they were doing well that is a good idea to focus on. So they're really, really useful to look at, to break down how to respond to questions. The specification, the sample assessment materials are on there as well, that you may already have been looking at anyway. And then there's lots of teaching and learning materials and about training sessions and those exemplars, further things to have a look at. But as I say, the document that you've been using today, that is in the resources from this training session. So make sure you download that from this session if you haven't already been using it. So the teaching and learning, I'm talking about this website. Here we go. You can see the actual screen. This is just, of course, a screenshot with some of that information on. So have a look at this, and that will direct you to the relevant bits to make sure you're accessing all the materials that are going to be helpful to you. There's the web page has 4 tabs on it. Basically, I just briefly went through talking about exam materials and the spec and the SAMs and the teaching and learning materials. There's also forms and administration documents, so that will help with the admin side of it. And Claire very helpfully has just put a reminder about downloading the materials for you. So as I say, make sure you do that. Now, one of those things in the support was Results Plus. Now, this is a free online tool for teachers. You can look at a breakdown of student performance, so you can get lots and lots of data about how your centre, your school has performed in the area, how it's performed overall. You can look at mock results as well. That can be fed into the system. You can get an idea, benchmark against other schools and other countries even, to get an idea about how your students are performing. You can identify topics and certain questions where students maybe benefit from further learning. So it's a good way to adapt and change your approach maybe, or see what you're doing right to further guide your teaching and the learning from your students. And there you go. Students take the exam on paper, but those exams, when you send them in, or the exams officer sends them in, they are actually scanned, and examiners mark them online rather than the actual paper that your students have sat them on. And then that performance, once they're marked, that goes into this mass data storage, so it can share those performance reports to help you. Now, Exam Wizard is another feature that can be utilised. This tool can be very useful in producing exercises. Maybe past papers are used. You can prepare your own exam papers, maybe for mocks even. It might be that you've not gone through certain topics yet, so you don't want to be testing your students on those. So you can devise your own papers, because the Exam Wizard will use the topics you want it to. Every series, the principal examiners put together the topic areas, so they're, according to the specification, they're matched up, and that's what Exam Wizard will do. It will prepare those topic areas and collate them for you as to what you actually need. Now, the ATS, the access to scripts, this is after your students have taken the exam and they've had them marked. You can, provided you have their permission, you can access their papers to see the questions they did well in, questions they maybe didn't do as well in. You can see how they performed to give you an idea about areas that maybe they're struggling on, or what they've done well. It might be as expected. It might be something in that you weren't expecting, good or bad. So it's a good way, a free way of accessing that information and seeing real hand what they have actually achieved. But as I say, it must be with their permission. It is free and it is available from results day. So that's something else to definitely have a look at after the exams. There are additional resources available, as well as everything we've been talking through on the website, some paid for resources, as well as all the many free materials available. Pearson Publishing, specifically relevant to economics, international AS and A-level economics, there is the student book, which there is some information there for you on the screen. I'll just let you have a quick read through that, but it's in the downloadable material of these slides as well. And then the international on-screen assessment. Now, this is a relatively new thing. So yes, traditionally students sit the exams on paper. In some subjects, it is now possible to sit the exams on the computer. Of course, many students are much more familiar with just using the computer and not writing. So this is the way forward. It is gradually becoming available in more and more subjects. I'm going to show you the sort of timescale we have for some of those subjects now. It's certainly proved popular with the students that have done it so far. So on screen rather than on paper. And as you can see from this time scale here, 2022-23, it was just available for some of the international GCSEs, just English language and literature. This year, it's been available for business, economics and history at international GCSE level. And next year it's going to be available with geography, Pakistan studies and Islamic studies at international GCSE level as well. And gradually more and more subjects will be linked into this. So it's something to be aware of, something to look out for, that it's being offered to centres should they choose to do that rather than the paper-based version. So just so you can maybe have a look at that if it's relevant to you, if your centre offers these qualifications at the moment. I promised contact details, so our dedicated subject advisor for international A-level economics is Colin Leith. He and his team are fantastic at replying to comments, questions, and you have there a phone number and an email address to contact Colin and his team with anything that you want to check over and ask about the qualification. And I will go back to that slide at the end, just to make sure you have opportunity to note it down. I just want to make sure we complete all of these, and then I'll go back to any questions in the few minutes we have left. So I will go through, there's a couple in chat. We've responded to most things in the slide, but I'll just make sure I go over those points again. And as you can see, thank you very much for your time today. So I just put that back up for a few minutes while I talk over. There's a couple of things just to clarify again. So yeah, there is no negative marking. If there's an error in a levels-based question, we mark what is there. So if there is, as long as it's not saying the answer is yes, the answer is no, and it's detracting then, and they're really showing a lack of understanding about the economics, which is a bit of a different category. But yeah, there might be something that is incorrect. We try to be as positive as we can. So if they've done a fantastic answer, it is still possible to score full marks and get to the top of the level, even if there is an error in there, as long as that is not detracting from the response that is good enough to score the material, to gain the full marks in the material. Of course, it might be less likely if they're spending time doing that, because maybe they won't therefore have enough time to provide a stronger response. But yes, it is certainly still possible. Flawed material can be ignored if it is not detracting from the response that's in there. So hopefully that helps with that question. Anything else? Jessie, you're asking about reordering teaching units. I'm afraid I'm not sure what that means. That might be something to ask Colin. I can only convey the material about the specification rather than any specifics such as that. So maybe, yeah, just check that with Colin. Oh, yeah, I think you're helping one another out there, which is fantastic. Thank you. I think that's all the questions. I think we've covered everything as we've gone through. If you've not downloaded the delegate booklet, unfortunately, we've gone through it all already, but as Claire has shown you a couple of times, make sure you get it from this set. We're just coming to an end in the next few minutes. Thank you very much. If there are any more questions, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time today, and good luck with the rest of your teaching and to your students. Thank you.